Hello and welcome to the Screencast for Modern Foreign Languages. It aims to support teachers in planning learning units or learning experiences using learning outcomes from across the three strands of the specification. There are handouts to support this screencast. If you're watching the screencast as a subject department, please select one member of the department as your facilitator of the meeting, who will lead the discussions, and please ensure that all members of the department have the necessary handouts required for the activities throughout this screencast. They are available to download from our website www.jct.ie. Let us look at planning for first year. As a subject department, we will ask ourselves the question: what do we want the students to know, understand, and be able to do at the end of the course? By asking ourselves what we want students to know, understand, and be able to do, we select the learning outcomes in focus across three strands. Remember, there is no need to try to address the entire learning outcome, as this is intended to be developed over the 3 years. Instead, you can highlight parts of the learning outcomes that you wish to focus on for a particular learning unit or learning experience. Here we have selected 3 learning outcomes from strand 1, 2, and 3. Please pause the screencast now and read the learning outcomes we have selected for this unit of learning. The reasons we chose these learning outcomes for first year MFL were the following. Learning outcome 1.9 is one of only 2 elements of spoken production. As we now distinguish between spoken production and spoken interaction, we felt it was necessary to get students to engage with the learning outcomes of spoken production early on in first year. In order to speak with others who speak the target language, especially native speakers, it is essential that our students are aware of the correct pronunciation of words from the beginning. We then combined this learning outcome with a learning outcome from the second and the third strand. From strand 2, we chose learning outcome 2.2. Apply all language learning to creative activities such as producing simple games. Developing the key skill of being creative in their language learning will help them discover which way they learn best. The learning outcome we chose from the third strand is number 3.1. Name and describe some features of the target language country, such as places and landmarks. Students usually have prior knowledge in this area, whether it is due to past visits to the target language country or possible affiliations with football teams from various cities. We felt that pronouncing landmarks and cities correctly in the target language was both useful as well as necessary for the language and cultural development. In combining the 3 learning outcomes, we ensured that the students' communicative competence develops within authentic cultural contexts of the target language country or countries, while deepening the language awareness. There are, of course, other learning outcomes which would also combine well with the learning outcomes 1.9 or 3.1. They are just as valid. Flexibility and choice are important aspects to our new specification, and teachers across the country are encouraged to combine learning outcomes in a way which suits the context of their students and school. Please now pause the screencast and discuss alternative learning outcomes from strand 3, which may lend themselves to a similar unit of learning or learning experience for first year students. Next, we ask ourselves, how will the students demonstrate their learning of these particular learning outcomes? How will we as teachers know that they know? This is assessment in its broadest sense. It is not necessary to write down here what assessment activity you're planning with your class, rather how they will show you that they know. This specification has been designed to suit the needs of all students through varied assessment modes and methods. We will explore the topic of assessment further in our CPD Day 2, but for now it is enough to keep coming back to this question when designing learning experiences for students. Rather than tagging assessments on at the end, we front-load assessment to the planning stage by asking this question before teaching a unit. How do I know they know? Please now pause the screencast to brainstorm together how students can show you that they have achieved the learning set out in these learning outcomes. Again, there is not one single correct answer. What follows is our department's approach. The specification provides flexibility and choice for teachers and students. We as a department decided that being able to make the sounds associated with the alphabet of the target language and pronounce a range of cities and landmarks accurately would demonstrate the learning of these particular outcomes. This is not definitive, rather we decided as a subject department. Your subject department may have decided that students will demonstrate their knowledge of that particular learning outcome in a slightly different way. As you can see, we have not mentioned any activities or tests or exams here. The term assessment is used only to mean demonstrating learning. Often it is useful to think of can-do statements. You may already be planning with these statements. They are used throughout the Common European Framework of Reference. For further information on can-do statements, please check the resources folder of our website. For our second learning outcome, 2.2, apply all language learning to creative activities such as producing simple games, we decided as a department that students would demonstrate their learning by applying what they know in creating a matching game of landmarks and the cities where that landmark can be found. They must use a range of cities and landmarks from across a number of different target language countries. We repeated this process again for our third learning outcome, naming and describing some features of the target language country or countries such as places and landmarks. We as a department decided that students would be able to locate a range of famous landmarks and cities in the target language country or countries. Developing can-do statements specific to particular contexts illustrates again the integrated nature of our approach in creating a learning unit for our students. By combining 2 to 3 learning outcomes from across different strands, we create a manageable unit of learning where students are able to demonstrate what they have learned within that context. It is important here to narrow the number of learning outcomes to 2 to 3. Any more than that makes it difficult to assess students' learning in a meaningful way. By choosing a small number of learning outcomes from across 2 to 3 strands, we avoid that the learning outcomes turn into lists of things to tick off. Let's go back to our planning template for a moment. We have already asked ourselves the questions: what do I want my students to be able to know, understand, or be able to do? And how will I know they know? As mentioned previously, it is envisaged that these questions be asked as MFL departments. For our last question, what will you do to get them there? We are moving to learning activities. There is a temptation to design the learning activities first and then tag the outcomes on after. This is to be avoided. As mentioned previously, we plan our learning activities with our particular students in mind. Although learning outcomes and assessments will be agreed as departments, learning activities will vary depending on what suits the individual teacher and your students best. Please now pause the screencast and design a series of activities which will culminate in the assessment of each of these learning outcomes. There need not be a written task or test at the end of the learning unit, as long as learning can be demonstrated by each student. You will now see a number of different approaches to these learning outcomes from the members of our team. As you will see, they have addressed the learning outcomes in similar ways, but their activities vary. You may pause the screencast on each of the following slides. These planning templates are also available to view in the planning folder of our website. Remember, when planning with learning outcomes, it is not necessary to plan every little detail of each lesson. There is also no need to try to include literacy or numeracy strategies or any of the key skills or statements of learning into your planning, as they are all embedded in the learning outcomes. From that perspective, the planning process has become streamlined. As we get to know the specification and collaborate with teachers in our schools, regions, and nationally, we will become more familiar with this planning process. Try to avoid planning for long periods of time. It is more beneficial to plan for one term and review your plan as you go through first year. We now leave you with some key messages. When planning learning units or learning experiences, we use 2 to 3 learning outcomes from across the strands. We front-load assessment to the planning stage by asking, how do we know they know? And we plan the learning units and their assessment collaboratively within our MFL department. We plan the activities either individually or collaboratively. Thank you for watching this screencast. We hope it has been helpful to you in trying to create learning units or learning experiences using learning outcomes from across the strands. Remember, the specification provides flexibility to students as well as teachers, so there isn't just one right answer.